good morning, very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a delight having you here at the Heart of HR webinar, Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader, with Herminia Ibarra. It's such a privilege having Herminia here, and I'd like to start by discussing what the webinar will be focusing about. Firstly, rethinking the old paradigm of thinking first, acting second. Then we're going to a couple of minutes on focusing on the outside, what it actually means. We're going to cover the leadership authenticity trap, maximizing leadership impact, and the role of HR in digitalization. Throughout the webinar, it's important you can interact with us today. So you can type your questions in a comment box, and my colleagues will be happily get the answers, get the questions and forward it to Herminia. So we try to answer as many questions as possible. Even if you don't have an opportunity to answer now, we shall do it at a later stage. Herminia will be speaking at the HR Congress in Brussels. It's such a privilege having her on board together with an elite panel of speakers. So all webinar attendees qualify for a 20% discount. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce the speaker, Herminia Ibarra, the Charles Andy Visiting Professor of Organization Behavior at London Business School, also a co-chair professor of leadership and learning at INSEAD. Herminia, it's such a great pleasure. Thank you very, very much for joining us today.
Thanks so much.
Before we start the actual session and interview with you, I'd like to invite the audience for a poll question. And on your right side, you see everyone who joined in, you can see a poll question. What are your top challenges in leadership? And we're launching the poll. We can see the answers are coming in. And we wait for the answers to come in. And I'm happy to share. You will see the screen sharing. So we're closing the poll in 5 seconds. And we can see, as you can see, the numbers are nicely coming in. Basically, managing, as you can see, the poll result, managing internal stakeholders and the politics is really ranks quite high on the agenda. Now, let's move on to the interview. And the first question to Herminia is actually, obviously, most of you know that Herminia is the author of the best-selling book, Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader. And you suggest in that book that acting first is important to thinking. So what has prompted you to reconsider the old paradigm of thinking, acting process?
That's a great question to start. And let me just put out a caveat. I am by no means saying stop thinking and shoot from the hip. What I'm talking about is what's the process that you go through when you're trying to transition into a new role or a new way of leading. And what's really at the heart of it is your mindset about what's important, about what's valuable, about what to contribute, about what leadership is. And the deal is that you can't change your mindset directly, because your mindset is the product of your experience, what you have learned from your experience about what works, what doesn't work, about who you are. You don't change your mindset directly. The only way you can change it is by getting new experiences that challenge the way you think, that open your eyes to different ways of looking at things. And it is doing, in that sense, acting, as in to get yourself into new and different situations, new and different experiences that will change the way you think.
Mm. So do first and think second. You got to be a risk taker in that sense. I'm wondering, just turning to the audience again, is there any questions in regards to what Herminia said about you can't change who you are, act first and do it first before you actually sit back and think? Okay. No questions are coming in, so we'll continue with the next question. And you also suggest in your book, Act as a Leader, Think Like a Leader, that while insight is absolutely necessary, successful leaders must develop outside to be really effective. Can you please elaborate on this? What is outside, and how do you develop an outside?
Right. So let me define it first and perhaps give an example. Outside is simply the fresh perspective that you get from doing new things and interacting with new and different people. It's kind of opening up your horizons. And I'll give you an example that directs directly connects to your poll. You said that as you did this poll, the thing that came up as the biggest leadership challenge is stakeholder management and internal politics. Now, that's an interesting one because we know that as organizations require people to cross more organizational lines and to collaborate more cross-functionally, all of a sudden you have a bigger and more diverse set of stakeholders to deal with. Now, some people consider that politics, and some people consider that to be a very legitimate leadership task, which is getting buy-in from people who are different from you. Now, some organizations have dysfunctional politics, that's for sure. But how do you wrap your head around this new leadership requirement that actually requires you to do that? The only thing you can do is get involved in projects that will have you managing stakeholders that are different, that will have you working cross-functionally, so that then on the basis of your experience, that outside that you've gotten, not reflection, not thinking, not a framework, not a book, you can figure out what kind of leader, at least start figuring out what kind of leader you might be in a context that requires that kind of stakeholder management that you haven't done before.
Mm-hmm. That's a really, really important view in terms of the networking, in that sense, the professional sense, what you suggest to build those relationships proactively and dare to be a risk taker, go out there and build the outside. I'm turning to the audience again. We're interested in your view to move to the next session of the interview and the webinar, your poll question. In your view, what's the most important quality of the leader? Now, you will see on your right side that all the qualities are equally important, probably. But maybe in your view, some of the qualities are ranked higher a little bit than the others. So in your view, if you were to pick one, what is the most important quality of a leader? How do you judge a leader in your own sort of subjective personal view? And I see the answers are coming in nicely. So we wait for another 4 or 5 seconds. And yep, stopping the poll now. Interesting, the top 3, as you can see, the results. While, of course, drive, vision, and emotional intelligence ranks really high, but the highest ranking quality of a leader is authenticity. So you have to be very authentic. And here's a very interesting question goes to Herminia, because you've got a very unique view on being authentic. It is an important, it's a gold standard of leadership. However, you argue that a simplistic understanding of what authenticity means may certainly hinder growth and limit leadership impact. Can you please explain what you mean by simplistic understanding of what authenticity means, and how can you maximize leadership impact with authenticity in your view?
Okay, so a lot of different things in that. Let me start by saying that indeed, today one of the qualities that we value most in leaders is authenticity. And it's really easy to understand why we want our leaders to be real. And it's no wonder that the importance of authenticity has risen in direct correlation with how our trust in top management has fallen. And so that's what's behind it. I will by no means argue that authenticity is not important, but what I have learned in studying leaders who are moving into different roles or in situations that require them to lead very differently than they have in the past, those requirements actually often make them feel that they're faced with a trade-off between being themselves on one hand and doing what it takes to be successful on the other hand. In those situations, you can simply say, well, that's not me. I don't do stakeholder management or politics or networking or inspirational communication. I'm a by the facts person, for example. Or you can say, this is completely outside my skill set and comfort zone, and I'm going to try it, and I'm going to experiment, and I'm going to learn. And even if it feels a bit fake and contrived or disingenuous, I need to learn how to do it differently. And so I'm going to try these behaviors for the sake of learning. That's what I'm advocating, because what I have seen is that a lot of people use the term authenticity to mean being as I always have been, being my historical self, not a future possible. And what I'm urging people to do is to work on the future possible. And if it's a future possible, you don't have the answer yet. You don't know what that new you with those greater leadership skills look like. The only way you can figure it out is by experimenting, and because experiments don't always work out, sometimes it will feel inauthentic and not you until you have figured it out.
Mm-hmm. But but if it's not you, and you still remain authentic, as probably as our friend Garrett Jones at London Business School, your colleague, says in the "Why Should Anyone Be Led by You?" is be yourself more with skills. So you've got to have the skills in place. The next question, let's move on to leadership training, as organizations are spending in the US alone some $14 billion on leadership training and various leadership interventions. And yet leadership in that sense very often is not impacting enough. So a return on investment is not quite there. So based on your view, what are the typical pitfalls you see, and what do you think organization must change in order to maximize return on their leadership training investment?
Right. So as we know, the worst possible thing an organization can do is send talented managers or leaders to a fantastic leadership program or educational program where they get really psyched up and learn some new things, and then they come home and can't put any of them to use. That's the worst recipe. Not only did you waste the money from the program, but you're probably going to lose that person if they're any good. So, the best thing that you can do as an organization is choose your programs strategically and harness them to things that you're doing internally as part of the day-to-day and as part of the day job to help people get into assignments, roles, projects, task forces that will allow them to use what they have learned in those programs. That's the only way to go at it. A program does a couple things. One is it gives people a chance to take a step back. We don't often have a chance to do that in our busy lives. When you take a step back, a lot of things start to gel. If you add to that a dose of feedback, meeting new people who spark new thought and some content, that's a very powerful mix, but you have to be able to use it once you get back home.
Absolutely. So it's very, very critical. Whatever new skills you learn, you put in practice. Just a personal question myself, coming from me in terms of measuring the training itself. Have you seen any good examples of HR analytics in terms of leadership training intervention, or can we say that HR analytics kind of a buzzword in HR? Is this something which may help organizations to maximize leadership training investment by any means?
There's a lot to be said for people analytics. The problem is that what you really want to measure is the longer term impact of training. We measure people as they leave and they're very happy and satisfied, but that's not necessarily the right measure. You want to understand what's happening a year down the line, 2 years down the line. And the problem is that a lot of things intervene in that time that are not within your control. People move, people shift. Some have had assignments that help them make things happen. Others have not. And so there's a lot of variables at play, and that's what has really kept us from developing the sophisticated analytics that we need in order to measure the results of these programs.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you very much, Herminia, for your insights. Now I'm turning to the audience. Are there any questions? We are probably halfway through the webinar, so I'm just wondering if anybody has any questions in regards to leadership training, leadership impact, and some of the questions coming in. We're still waiting for the questions, but we don't have that much of a time, unfortunately. However, we do keep all the questions, and we'll share it with Herminia. One question I have, and it comes from Kathleen. And Kathleen says, I've experienced working in China where one dilemma often cited is how to be authentic and protect save face at the same time. So it's a bit of bringing in a bit of a cultural element of being authentic and save face at the same time. What would you say about, Herminia, in terms of working in different cultures, remaining authentic, and in the meantime saving face? There's a question from Kathleen.
Right. So I'm not sure exactly what she means by save face, if it means not embarrass someone else by saying what she really means. I'm going to go with that. First, let me just say that one of the interesting things about authenticity is that it gets expressed very differently in different cultures. And one of the big authenticity dilemmas that people face is when they come from a national culture that has kind of different rules than the culture of the organization in which they operate. For example, a very common one is you're in an organization that encourages very sharp and blunt debate and disagreement, yet you come from a culture in which you want to allow people to save face and you don't confront them directly. That's really hard. I don't have a straight answer for it. One is you recognize that that's a dilemma. Two is you try to talk to people who have experienced it, who have worked it out, who have managed it, people who are effective both in your own national culture and your organization's culture. And third is you experiment. Rather than saying, I have to save face, I have to save face, you can ask yourself, what would happen if I actually do something that's counter to that? Is it a problem? How do people react? What can I learn from it? Because otherwise you remain stuck in the same dilemma.
It certainly is a big topic, being authentic, being an effective leader, at the same time remaining yourself while you're learning new skills. So this is something hopefully we'll have a time to go into more details during your masterclass in Brussels. Now, moving on to the next session on digital leadership. And here's a poll question. I'd like to invite the audience to share your views. Where is your organization on digital leadership journey? And please turn to the navigation panel on the right, and we're waiting for the answers to come in. Obviously, digitization plays a major part in changing organizations, and HR, in many of the organizations, HR sort of tends to carry the torchlight. So waiting for the answers to coming in, and a few more seconds, a count to 5, and closing the poll. And what's interesting, as you can see, the results, only just a handful of companies can consider themselves as kind of a leaders of the pack. Most organizations started some digital adoptions, but quite a few of them have not really considered digitalization as the way forward yet. It's certainly something which probably still awaits. And so the question to you, Herminia, is that digitalization certainly not only changed the way companies operate, but also changing the kind of leaders we need. In your view, what is your role of HR in driving digital transformation in organizations and nurturing digital leaders?
Well, I'm going to say something provocative here, and this actually connects to one of the comments that I saw come in about how artificial intelligence is going to change all of our jobs. There's no way HR is going to be able to nurture that digital transformation if it doesn't nurture it in itself. HR is one of the fields that's most being disrupted by digital and by artificial intelligence. A lot of things that we have done traditionally in HR are now being automated, are being made more intelligent with artificial intelligence, are being subject to big data. And a lot of people in HR have simply not kept up with those trends, have not understood how to use them to transform what are essentially fairly outdated systems that we're still using in HR. And so I think one of the great things that HR can do is use its own learning experience as a laboratory for then how to help people in other areas of the organization step up to digital. And in both of those cases, a big headline is you can't do it looking inside. You have to look outside. You have to get outside into it, which is see how the leading edge is doing it, look at the pioneers, and find out what you can learn from them.
So it's absolutely the outside, what you suggested right at the beginning of the webinar. If you wish to drive digital transformation, in fact, if you wish to remain relevant in the future as an HR leader, probably we can be as provocative as it is. You got to be outside. You got to have an outside thinking, and you got to develop your outside when it comes to us later on developing insight and leading the organization on this exciting journey. Turning to the audience again, the last chance to ask questions from Herminia, and a couple of questions are coming in from Matthew. Do you think artificial intelligence will replace middle management or team leaders in the future? Is this something that actually personally concerns you?
Right. So one of the things that we have seen is that organizations have been delayering quite consistently for some time. Part of it is for cost efficiency, and part of it is because people are preferring to work in flatter organizations. So as that delayering happens, more and more people are actually doing specialty work themselves as opposed to managing people. Within that specialty work, you really have to understand what of that work is really going to be very soon easier done by machines or software more effectively, more efficiently, and what is it that really requires the human touch. Now that's going to be a different set of answers for different jobs, but anybody who isn't asking themselves, what of the things that I do could a robot or an AI do better, is not preparing themselves for the future.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Herminia, for these insights. Last but not least, you will be speaking in Brussels at the HR Congress. You'll be delivering a keynote and the masterclass. Many of the speakers will expect what to expect. So I'm just wondering if you could share with us what can people expect as a result of your keynote and masterclass in Brussels?
Some really clear ideas about what to do tomorrow and the next day. I'll be telling lots of stories, sharing lots of data, and most of all, provoking a bit people to start to do differently. Remember, the title of my book is Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader, not the other way around. And so my keynote will be successful if it gets people doing different things, as opposed to saying, that provokes some thought. What I want is for people to go out and do different things.
So I really recommend to our listeners to stretch yourself, as Herminia suggests, be a risk taker in that sense, develop your outside, and join the HR Congress. And certainly, as a webinar attendee, as a token of our appreciation, we'd like to thank you for joining for us for this good half-an-hour session. And you can save 20% discount of your ticket. So come and experience Herminia, Dave Ulrich, and an elite panel of speakers live, up close and personal, where you will be provoked, you will be certainly challenged, but it's going to be 2 days of your investment where you will gain so much knowledge and so much insights and outsides that will help you to become one of the leaders of the HR community, one of the leader pack. So with that, thank you very, very much for joining, and thank you, Herminia, for being a fantastic interview. And we certainly look forward to meeting you in Brussels soon. And for the rest of you, I hope you found the webinar useful. Please do keep us in mind. There are future webinars coming up. Keep visiting our website, and we shall be hopefully meeting you either in person or online somewhere in the near future. Thank you very much. Have a great day, Ed. Cheers. Bye now.
Bye, everyone.